I'm Jeanette Keynes from Jewelry Arts Inc. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use soldering clay to conquer those really difficult to set up soldering scenarios. So check out this beautiful earring that Beth is working on. We've got a beautiful bezel. We've got this beautiful little dome here that we're actually going to have 3 pearls sitting on the prongs. Ved is sexy and beautiful. And she's done this cute little neck in between to create a little space between the two. But she wants a granule there.
How are you?
So what we're gonna do is this. Soldering the granule in there is really no big deal. We're gonna like the little sandwich method. However, her little peg, if you will, is up a little bit. You know what I mean? It's not sitting level with the bezel. So in other words, if I go to solder something on top of it, that little shit is probably gonna move and we will not be happy. So we were discussing, like, sometimes I'll just prop something up with a third arm or a support or whatever, but I kept looking at it and I couldn't come up, like I have some titanium things that work well, but again, they're too wide. So I was like, oh, okay, so we're gonna use some of, what's this stuff called?
Soldering clay?
Soldering clay, yay! So this is really, I don't use this like every minute of every day, but there are times where you just have like a weird shape or something that needs support. So this would do 2 things. First of all, that little peg will kind of rest on it, so it won't be as likely, because even if the solder reflows, if it can't move, it won't really matter. But also we'll kind of smear this underneath. It'll make it kind of dirty, which will mean the solder will be much less likely to flow. So really it's kind of doing 2 things. It's ensuring our success 2 ways. The only thing I don't like is you have to stick your finger in here and it's a little oogie. And I'm going to wash my hands afterward, but I'm just going to kind of get a little bit of this out of here. And I'm going to make a little snake.
In time. No, nothing I had seen had done. And would not help me.
But yeah, this stuff is really good for when you have stuff that's like an odd shape or whatever, because you can just take this and shape it and
so it'll support everything.
it. Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to make a really big piece of this. I'm going to make like a little,
one more thing.
You know, just like a little snake that fits in there.
Are you going to fit it just under that peg or under the whole thing?
No, just under the peg, really. That's really all it needs to do. Because this is resting on the block, and this is in that little depression that's also resting. And I'm just going to move that granule over to the side so it doesn't run away on us. And it's kind of soft too, so it's nice. You can kind of put it in place and then kind of just squish it. So I'm just going to put like a piece like that. I'm going to put it back there and I'm just going to kind of press. And that way, like I said, in 2 ways, it'll support the bar and it'll make it dirty. So that way, because a lot of times too, just so you know, it's not so much that it's such a big deal if your solder reflows. It's a big deal if the thing moves. You know what I mean? Like a lot of times when you're soldering, your solder does reflow to a certain extent. If it can't move anywhere, it doesn't really matter. That's why like vertical seams are so vulnerable, because they can, you know what I mean, and give. Okay,
So best practice, if I'm going to do this, I shouldn't have cleaned up all the excess solder. Is that right? Or because if it's going to reflow, I'm going to have to clean it again.
No, you shouldn't have to reflow it. You shouldn't have to clean it up again, because normally even if it flows a little bit, it just sits there. It doesn't go anywhere. It shouldn't be a problem. Okay, so we've got that. I'm gonna
Do you want a smaller dowel for that?
I don't think you're gonna have a dowel small enough for that, but I have been known to use a toothpick also for just such a...
Oh, there is a toothpick there.
Wood sticks. What could be more useful than wood sticks? So you see how I'm just like pushing that away a little bit? And I'm just gonna make sure none of it's on top. Okay, so you see what I mean? Like that's it. It's just a little support. This is not a very complicated thing at all, but that way it's just going to make sure that nothing can move.
Now, why wouldn't you just put the whole thing into a larger piece of clay?
You could, but like for stuff like this, when I'm going to balance that granule on top of a piece of solder, right? I want that shit to be level. So a big bunch of clay all underneath, if you're probably slanty shanty, and then you're dealing with that. So Normally, you know, when soldering, my mantra is like, put it flat, put it flat, put it flat. The flatter things are generally, the more they behave themselves. So that's why for this, I wouldn't do a big, I mean, you could if you had something really, you know, and you needed to. But for this, just a little thing like that is all we need. And now all we have to do is we're gonna like put a little square of solder, a little paste flux, we're gonna sandwich it and heat it. So the only other thing that you have to know about using this clay is that it can absorb some heat. Like it'll probably take a little more heat than you're used to solder something if you have the clay there, because it's like it's a little wet, it's a little, you know what I mean, it does absorb away some of the heat. So just know when you're working on it that like you might be like, oh shit, this should have flowed already, and maybe it's going to take a few extra seconds. It's not the end of the world, but just know that you know, and the more of it you use, the more obvious that result might be. Okay. So I'm going to put my adorable little square of solder there. I'm going to dry it a little bit. I'll put the granule on.
What's happening here today?
So I put a tiny little dot of paste flux and I dried it. And then if my tweezers are just a tiny bit wet and you put the solder there, it tends to stick like glue. I try to use my paste flux like glue as much as possible because you all spend a lot of fucking time chasing things around and moving, and everyone in the room is going, you know, that's right. As soon as like, oh yeah. Yeah. So as much as humanly possible, I try to use that method to keep it sitting there and behaving itself. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to pick up my adorable little granule, and I usually try to get it a tiny bit wet, and I'm just going to put it right on top of that piece of solder. And you know, this is something that people always will say. They'll be like, oh, your hands are so steady. No, they are fucking not. I drink a ton of coffee. If you notice, anytime I'm doing something, I am completely braced. Like this.
Should I zoom in on you?
Yeah, you see this? Like how I'm all braced, so then any small movement I make, I have control. And then people will be like, I'm trying to do it. Like, and they'll stand up, and that's also good. So you're standing up and you're like this, and I'm like, well, I can't do it like that either. You know what I mean? So always remember, get yourself comfortable first. You can like do the little butt wiggle, like I'm good, I'm settled. Brace yourself, and then you're making a very small movement. That's the key to having quote unquote steady hands. Okay, I'm gonna try to get this like this. And sometimes like you know, it'll sit there and behave itself, and sometimes it won't. Like that. And like that. And the fact of the matter is that fuckery is the norm. I'm gonna try to shift this around so I can get in there at a different angle. Like so. Now don't get me wrong, that little shit may hop right off of there as soon as I warm it up, but that's how we do it. And the real like trick with all this, I mean, I share with you everything that I do to try to make it easier, but guess what? When it falls off, I pick it up and I put it back on there. And I do that again and again and again until it sits there like I want it to. All the patience that I have in this life, I learned from making jewelry. I did not come into this with any natural store of patience at all. My teachers would really attest to that. But now I'm all mellow because after a couple years of making jewelry, I just cracked and realized it takes what it takes. Okay. I'm going to dry it a little bit gently, again, in the possibly vain hope that it'll sit there and behave itself. And also you notice my tweezers are never far away. I never set them down when I'm soldering. There you go. Look how nice that looks. I'll put the little macro on and I'll show you a close-up of that, but it looks really good. All right, now that's the extreme close-up. So you see that beautiful connection of solder with the granule on the bezel and the granule on the little neck? So of course we're going to stop and pickle and look at it, but that looks really good. You know, just remember you have to be patient. These things very rarely, if ever, you know, work right the very first time. So there's just a beautiful little close-up. So you can see it's all clean now, so you can see that nice attachment. Mission accomplished.